The bus stop stranger. It was a bleak winter evening in downtown Toronto, the kind where the city seemed to fold into itself under a heavy blanket of snow. Emily had finished her late-night shift at the cafe where she worked part-time. Exhausted, she trudged to the bus stop, her breath forming icy clouds in the freezing air. The streets were eerily quiet, with only a few snow-covered cars parked along the curbs. She checked her phone, 11:48 p.m. The bus was running late due to the weather, and Emily shivered as the biting wind tore through her coat. She was alone at the stop, surrounded by the muffled silence of snow. At first, she welcomed the solitude, but the stillness quickly turned oppressive. Every creak of a distant branch, or faint crunch of snow underfoot, seemed unnaturally loud. As she waited, Emily pulled her scarf tighter and glanced around. The dim light from the street lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the ground, making the empty street seem alive. She tried to shake off the unease creeping up her spine, but then she noticed him. The arrival. A man stepped into the glow of the street lamp. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. His heavy boots crunched loudly against the snow as he approached the bus shelter. Emily stiffened, her instincts immediately on high alert. The man stopped a few feet away, just outside the shelter. He turned his head slightly, enough for Emily to catch a glimpse of his face. His features were sharp, his eyes hollow and unblinking, and his lips curled into a faint, unsettling smirk. "Cold night, huh?" His voice was gravelly, with a tone that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She nodded stiffly, avoiding eye contact. She didn't want to engage, but something about his presence felt predatory. The man stepped closer, his boots leaving deep impressions in the snow. "What's a pretty girl like you doing out here all alone?" he asked, his smirk widening. Emily's heart raced. "I am waiting for the bus," she replied curtly, clutching her phone tightly. She glanced down the street, willing the headlights of her bus to appear, but the road remained dark. The invitation. The man leaned against the shelter's metal frame, his eyes never leaving her. "You shouldn't be out here. It's not safe," he said, his tone laced with mock concern. "Why don't you come with me? I'll give you a ride. I promise I am safe." Emily took a step back, her pulse hammering in her ears. "No, thank you," she said firmly. "I am fine waiting for the bus." The man chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "Come on," he urged, his smirk fading into something darker. "I'll get you home safely. Don't worry." Her hands shook as she opened her phone's camera app, pretending to text someone. "I already have a ride," she lied. "My friend's on the way." The man's expression changed. His smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, piercing stare. "You don't need to lie to me," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am just trying to help. A narrow escape." At that moment, Emily heard the sound of approaching footsteps. A woman, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, walked toward the shelter. The stranger's demeanor shifted instantly. He stepped back, his predatory energy dissipated as he turned his attention to the newcomer. "Good evening," the man said, his tone suddenly polite. Emily felt a wave of relief as the woman entered the shelter and smiled at her. The stranger didn't linger. After a few moments of awkward silence, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Emily exhaled shakily, her body trembling not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She whispered a quiet "thank you" to the woman, who nodded knowingly. The bus finally arrived, and both women boarded. Emily sat near the driver, her eyes scanning the dark streets outside, half expecting the man to reappear. The aftermath. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every creak of her apartment floor and every gust of wind outside her window made her heart race. She replayed the encounter in her mind, wondering what might have happened if the woman hadn't arrived. The next day, she shared her experience with her coworkers. One of them, a seasoned cafe manager named Marcus, listened intently, his expression darkening. "There have been reports of a man like that in the area," he said. "The police are looking for him. Be careful, Emily." Her stomach dropped. She decided to report the incident to the authorities, providing as many details about the man as she could remember. The officer who took her statement assured her they were investigating similar reports. The A week later, Emily thought she had moved on. She avoided late-night shifts and always made sure to leave work in the company of coworkers. But one evening, as she walked to her car in the nearly empty cafe parking lot, she felt it again, that same oppressive sense of being watched. Her breath quickened as she glanced over her shoulder. There, standing at the edge of the lot, was the man. His hood was down this time, revealing his sharp features and that same chilling smell. Emily's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. "Hey!" the man called out, his voice echoing in the still night. "We didn't finish our conversation." She fumbled for her keys, her hands trembling. The man started walking toward her, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Emily managed to unlock her car and slip inside just as he reached the driver's side. He knocked on the glass, his smirk now a menacing grin. "You really shouldn't ignore people," he said. Emily started the engine and backed out of the lot, her tires screeching against the asphalt. As she sped away, she glanced in the rear view. The man stood in the middle of the lot, his eyes following her car until she turned the corner. The final step, Emily knew she couldn't let this go on. She contacted the police again, this time with a description of his behavior and location. They assured her they would increase patrols in that night. She received a text from an unknown number. The message read, "You think the cops can protect you? Don't look away next time." Fear turned to anger. Emily refused to let him control her life. She installed a security camera at her apartment and carried pepper spray wherever she went. She also began taking self-defense classes, determined to be ready if he ever confronted her. The resolution. Weeks turned into months, and the man disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Emily never saw him again, but the experience changed her for she became more vigilant, more aware of her surroundings, and more confident in her ability to protect her. Looking back, Emily often wondered what drove the man to target her. Was it random, or had he chosen her for a specific reason? She would never know, but one thing was certain: she had faced her fear and refused to be a victim.